This screencast is going to discuss the pros and cons of indentured servitude. So please create a new notes page, which is on the right side, called Pros and Cons of Indentured Servitude, and today's date. Indentured servitude, benefits and drawbacks. That's pros and cons. Uppercase Roman numeral 1, pros and cons of indentured servitude. Benefits of indentured servitude. Before I jump into this, just remember, England had just experienced the 30 Years' War. Lots of people were struggling with poverty and lack of jobs, and they were in debt. In addition, overpopulation in cities was happening. So London was a very overpopulated city. So as a result, it was struggling with poverty, criminal activity, disease, etc. So, lowercase a, the British Empire. So we're going to focus on the British government first. Here is the benefits for the British Empire. Lowercase Roman numeral 1, it removed criminals from the cities. Lowercase Roman numeral 2, it removed the poor. And lowercase Roman numeral 3, it removed people that were in debt. So help those in need of working off their debt. And Roman numeral number 4, lowercase, it expanded the size of the empire. So now Great Britain could compete with France and Spain, having a colony and then populating it with indentured servants. So what was the benefit of indentured servitude for planters in colonial America? These planters are the people that own the land, were planting the crops. Lowercase Roman numeral 1, free labor for harsh work. So the labor was cheap labor for harsh work. They did have to pay for the freedom dues and pay for passage over, boarding, lodging, etc. But cheap labor for harsh work. Lowercase Roman numeral 2, it increased the size of the workforce, so you could produce more product. You could produce more cash crops. Roman numeral 3, get more work done. That increased profits. With more hands in the fields, you're going to increase profits. And now we're on C, which is for the indentured servants. What was the benefit of indentured servants? What was the benefits of indentured servitude for the servant, him or herself? Lowercase Roman numeral 1, it allowed them to have a new start at life. And that was big because in England and back in Europe, it was very difficult, social mobility. So if you were born poor, you stayed poor. This is a fresh start. If you were a criminal, a fresh start. Roman numeral 2, a chance at social mobility. This means you could move up the social ladder. If you were poor, perhaps you could have the opportunity as a result of your freedom dues to own land. That was a big deal. It could move you up the social ladder. Roman numeral 3, the opportunity of a job. And with the hope of freedom, you could get land as part of that freedom due. Native Americans, how are they impacted by the indentured servitude, and what were some of the benefits of indentured servitude that brought people over from Europe to the colonies? Well, Roman numeral 1, opportunities to exchange culture and technology. So let's say farming practices. Each group could teach one another better ways to farm. Roman numeral 2, trade. You could trade with one another and get items that they otherwise normally would not have. Okay, still continuing with the pros and cons of indentured servitude. B, drawbacks or cons of indentured servitude. For the British Empire or the government, the British government, treat citizens like enslaved labor. So they were treating their own citizens as though they were enslaved labor. That gave people, morally gave them a problem, it was a problem. Roman numeral 2, there was a limited supply. There's only so many criminals, so many poor, so many people in debt. Eventually you're going to run out of people to send over as indentured servitude. Where do you look to for labor then? Letter B, this is the planter class. What are the drawbacks or cons? Need to replace frequently. So remember, 5 to 6 out of every 10 indentured servants are dying during their servitude, so you'd need to replace them frequently. Also, they could escape easily because they blended in to the society around them. They were English citizens. Need to pay for passage and for freedom package. That was not cheap, to pay for passage and the freedom package, as well as pay for their life, their food, their clothing, their boarding and lodging. Roman numeral 3, indentured servants could run away. Talked about that earlier. Easier for them to run away in the colonies and blend into other English communities. Indentured servants, what were the drawbacks of indentured servitude for the servant, him or herself? 60% die before service is even over. So you need that constant renewal. Well, you're going to run out. But for the indentured servants themselves, high case of death. If you went on that boat to travel to the colonies, you had a greater chance of knowing that you would not last the length of your service. Roman numeral 2, hard work and harsh conditions. It was not easy living. Roman numeral 3, land given isn't great. So when they got the freedom due, not only was their life harsh and hard while they were working as an indentured servant with very few opportunities to buy things, purchase things, etc., or live a better life, once they got their freedom, the land they received was poor. And for Native Americans, what are the drawbacks? Conflict and war. We discussed the Powhatan and English wars, and along those border lines that were established between the native tribes and the English government, which a lot of times the natives were forced to move west, conflict and war were frequent when indentured servants getting that poor land were encroaching on the land of the Powhatan. And Roman numeral 2, forced removal from traditional land. So native people, let's use the Powhatan as an example, were being forced to move off their land because of a desire for tobacco and also a desire to give land as a freedom due to former indentured servants. Roman numeral 2, end of indentured servitude. So how it came to an end. So ending of indentured servitude, A, lowercase a, it was temporary. Planters must continually replace workers and train new ones. Costly and lose production. So you're always having to have to replace those workers because 6 out of 10 were dying. Lowercase b, they can easily escape, blend in with the colonial population easy, hard to recapture. C, there was a limited supply. Britain needs workers, especially with London Fire of 1666. They needed workers themselves back in London to rebuild the city in 1666. So they didn't want to send people over to the colonies to work, poor people in need of jobs. Rather, they wanted to keep them in London. So need people in labor to rebuild the city, not go to the colonies. And lowercase d, don't want to treat citizens as enslaved labor. This gave them a moral dilemma. How do we treat our own citizens as though they are enslaved? Okay, end of indentured servitude. B, slavery becomes the preferred source of labor. A, the precedent is set. Slavery was already existing in Spain and in France and in part of the English colonies. So the practice was already in place using Africans as enslaved labor. Spain and Portugal were using Africans as enslaved labor in the Caribbean and South America. And lowercase Roman numeral 2, already using Africans as indentured servants in the colonies, could and would be freed and would have rights of free men. So the indentured servants that were African were being freed and treated as though they were free men, but they could easily transition along those racial lines, easily make laws to make it so that slavery was in place. All right, thank you for listening.